Hello students, welcome to the channel. In the last video, we solved the first two passages of the writing section of the October 2020 SAT test. In this video, we'll solve the remaining two passages. Passage 3, the motivation of reputation. Motivating people to engage in socially beneficial behaviors, such as conserving energy resources, is a challenge. So here, my main sentence is motivating people to engage in socially beneficial behaviors is a challenge, and such as conserving energy resources. This is additional information. So I can put additional information between a pair of dashes or between a pair of commas. Since I already have a starting comma, I need to have a closing comma. So here the answer would be C. Many assume that the only way to encourage such engagement is through financial rewards or penalties. Harvard economist Erez Yuli and his colleagues have learned, however, that reputation is a strong incentive for making choices that aid the public good in ways that benefit everyone. Now, this is a redundancy question. Redundancy means the use of more words than are necessary, the use of repetitive information. So when I say that reputation can aid the public good means something that benefits everyone, right? That's understood. So this part is not required. So A is out. Good in society is already understood with public good, and good for all is also understood with that. So you just need to say the public good. That's all. Such choices might entail short-term costs, but they carry a potential long-term benefit. If other people see that an individual is willing to sacrifice personal convenience for the sake of the greater good, they might be inclined to sacrifice their own convenience for that individual's benefit someday. Yuli's team of researchers theorized about the historical importance of reputation by comparing different sign-up methods for a voluntary program aimed at preventing domestic power failures. Okay, so I need to introduce the primary focus. So let's read a little bit more. For the program, participants okayed the installation of a device in their homes that limited the use of an air conditioning unit when demand for energy was highest. So this question expects you to maintain the style of the passage, and your style should always be formal because you are expected to read this passage in a magazine or a published work. So something like okayed is too informal, so that can't be correct. Gave the thumbs up to is also informal. Permitted. Permitted is a good answer. It maintains the tone, is formal. And gave the green light to is also rather informal. So for the program, participants permitted the installation of a device. Researchers placed a sign-up sheet, right? I have the past tense in the sentence, in the paragraph. So I'll maintain the same tense here. Researchers placed a sign-up sheet in a public place in housing developments and apartment buildings. Some residents were asked to enroll using an anonymous code. Others were asked to use their names, which made the choice to join the program observable to neighbors. Okay, Yoli's team of researchers theorized about the historical importance. No, we are not talking about historical importance, so this is incorrect. Tested the effectiveness of reputation incentives. Yeah, this is a good answer because that's what they are doing. Proposed a new kind of reward system and convinced people to get involved. So I think the best answer with regard to reputation, because that's what the focus of the passage is B. Okay, the researchers found that the observable sign-up strategy was 3 times more effective than the anonymous one. So here I just am comparing the strategy with the anonymous strategy, right? So I don't have to say that of, and I don't have to say compared with and opposed to, because a simple than will make sense here. This strategy was more effective, was 3 times more effective than that. So A. They also determined that observable sign-up was considerably more effective than offering a $25 incentive to enroll. Even though people who enrolled in the program believed that they would suffer an inconvenience, less control over home temperature at certain times of the day, but the publicity of the choice to sign up was incentive enough for many to accept the inconvenience because it made others aware that they were doing their part to prevent blackouts. Okay, so here this but is wrong because I'm already saying even though people who enrolled in the program believe this, so I don't have to say anything here, delete. Since reputation sometimes fails to promote good deeds, the strength of its influence varies based on the likeness of one's participation being noticed. For example, in Yoli's study, sign-up rates were affected by the observability of the location where the sheet was placed. Okay, so I have to transition from the previous paragraph. In the previous paragraph, I spoke about how those whose contribution was publicized, they were more likely to participate in the program. And this is saying the strength of reputation's influence varies based on the likeness of one's participation being noticed. Okay. Although reputation can be a powerful motivator, the strength of its influence. Okay, so B seems a good answer. Reputation is the single most important factor. No, nowhere is that being said. One cannot account for the power of reputation, but no, that's not what we are saying. We know that it does influence, right? Yeah, so the best answer is B, because I'm saying it is a powerful motivator, but the strength of its influence varies based on the likeness of the participation being noticed. For example, in Yoli's study, sign-up rates were affected by the observability of the location where the sheet was placed. In residences, where sign-up sheets were posted in high activity public places like a shared mail area, anonymous enrollment was 4.8% and observable enrollment was 11.4%. Okay, so this is related to the graph. Anonymous was 4.8 and observable. So this is high activity public place. So where sign-up sheets were posted in high activity public places, right? So the way it's written seems correct. Where a sign-up sheet was posted, yeah, so it's A, right? Because that describes the condition where these data figures were reached. A difference of 6.6 percentage points. But in those with less active public areas, anonymous enrollment was 2.4 and observable was 3 a difference of only 1.4. So I definitely want to introduce this because this contrasts with this data point, which has already been discussed. So yes, it uses information from the graph to acknowledge an opposing point of view regarding the issue. No, this is not an opposing point of view. Yes, because it provides accurate evidence from the graph to support the paragraph's argument, right? The argument being that when it's a high activity public space, then the fact of being noticed, the fact of making a public commitment is more rewarding. The more observable the community-minded action, the more likely it is to benefit the individual's reputation, right? Because here I need to use a pronoun for community-minded action. The more observable that action, the more likely it is to benefit the individual's reputation. On the other hand, says Yoli's co-author, David Rand, if an action is not observable, then there is no problem with not participating. Passage 4, photosynthesis in the dark. Although it has been known for centuries that plants absorb carbon dioxide, a gas that animals exhale, that plants absorb, right? So this is wrong because I don't need a possessive here. So it's just D, right? Although it has been known for centuries that plants absorb CO2, it was not until the 1940s that scientists understood how plants use this gas during photosynthesis, the process by which plants convert light energy into chemical energy that they store in the form of sugars. The discovery was made through a series of experiments conducted by the chemists Melvin Calvin and Andrew Benson. Right, so here I am introducing these chemists, right? They are an essential part of the sentence. So I will not use any punctuation here. So A is right. Yeah, I will not put a comma. Definitely a comma after Calvin is not correct. And this colon is also not correct because it's just a continuous statement where I'm introducing them. Key to their early experiments was a technique called carbon labeling, which allowed Calvin and Benson to determine whether plants need light exposure while they break down CO2 to use its carbon atoms to construct sugars. The scientists decided to use a variation of CO2 in which the ordinary carbon atoms would be replaced with carbon-14, a radioactive isotope of carbon that would function as a radio tracer. Plants would absorb and metabolize the 14 CO2 as though it were regular CO2, right? As though it were. Because this is a hypothetical statement, right? So when I use a hypothetical statement, I always use the plural verb, even if the subject is singular. I wish he were here. I wish he were here, because he's actually not here, but I wish he were. So when I talk about a wish or a hypothetical statement, I use the plural verb even when the subject is singular. So plants would absorb and metabolize the 14 CO2 as though it were regular CO2. And then the researchers would track the 14C to determine what the plant had done with it. Okay, then I need to introduce the events recounted in the paragraph. So let's read further. One sample was stored in the dark for 8 hours. The air in that sample's container had CO2. The other sample was exposed to bright light for 1 hour. Okay, so the decision to use carbon labeling was critical. One advantage of using single-celled algae rather than other kinds of plants was that the algae could be conveniently collected. The question was, did light need to shine on the plants while they were breaking the bonds between the carbon and oxygen? Calvin and Benson began with 2 samples of living algae, right? So clearly D is the right answer because I'm describing those samples. One sample was stored in the dark and the other sample was exposed to bright light. So I need to introduce the samples. So D. This sample was considered to be pre-illuminated. Which choice completes the sentence with information most parallel to that provided in the previous one? So one sample was stored in the dark for 8 hours. The air in that sample's container had CO2. Right, and the air in that sample's container had no CO2. So the other sample was exposed to bright light and there was no CO2 there. After removing the air from both containers and placing them in the dark, the samples were exposed to the CO2. Yeah, so this is a modifier question because when I say after removing the air from both containers, this is a modifier because it is describing an action that someone did. So when I have a modifier, the part after the modifier should start with the subject that was described in the modifier. So who removed the air from both containers? The researchers. So I have to start the part after the comma with the researchers. The researchers exposed the samples to the 14 CO2. 5 minutes later, the algae samples were killed to prevent further metabolic activity and the molecular contents were examined. The sample initially stored in the dark container had produced almost no sugars made with the traceable 14C, indicated that the algae had not metabolized the 14 CO2. The algae had not been able to photosynthesize. Okay, so this is in other words, right? Because if they had not been able to make make sugars, it means that they had not been able to photosynthesize. So this is in other words. I can't say finally because it's not another step in a process. It is not a contrast and it's not an alternative, right? It is something that is simply written in another way. So in other words, if they had not been able to photosynthesize, but the algae in the other sample, which had been exposed to the 1 hour of light, produced Measurable concentrations of radioactive sugars. Measurable, concentrations is the best answer. Portion is not, you can't really use portion in a scientific sense for sugars. And similarly, these are not correct. So measurable concentrations, they could be measured and the sample exposed to light had produced radioactive sugars. In this sample, carbon atoms from the 14CO2 had been used to construct the frame of the sugar glucose. Oxygen and hydrogen atoms from another molecule were also used. Okay, which choice best, if most effectively, okay, this best is not right. Which choice most effectively combines the underlying sentences in a way that makes clear that the carbon atoms are more central to the discussion than the hydrogen and oxygen atoms? In this sample, carbon atoms had been used along with oxygen and hydrogen to construct the frame of the sugar glucose. Yeah, so this is a good option because along with oxygen and hydrogen is kind of presented as additional information, but the focus is on carbon. Carbon atoms from the 14CO2 and oxygen and hydrogen had been used. Yeah, so this doesn't kind of present oxygen and hydrogen is less important. The frame of the sugar glucose had been constructed using not only the carbon, yeah, this also doesn't do that. In conjunction with the carbon, this sample also used, yeah. So the only one which keeps the focus on carbon is option A. During its CO2 starved exposure to light, the algae had stored the light's energy and used that stored energy to construct sugar. Yeah, so it'll be D. I can break the sentences into two sentences. The algae had stored the light energy. It then later used that energy to construct sugars. Yeah, you can't say then later using with a semicolon because this would not be a complete sentence. And you can't have a complete sentence with a comma because that will be a comma splice error. So it's D. Okay, the writer wants to interpret the results of the experiment and set up the statement of the researcher's conclusion provided at the beginning of the next paragraph. Which choice accomplishes this? Throughout this experiment, Kelvin and Benson were able to conclude, through this experiment, they were able to conclude that light was not directly responsible for breaking CO2's bonds. Something else in the plant did that. The chemists spent several years identifying that enzyme, and their research helped elucidate the rest of the chemical cycle that results in the generation of glucose. Okay, so I need to complete the previous paragraph. Kelvin and Benson published their findings as part of a series of papers. Although the experience yielded some answers, questions remained. This experiment, in conjunction with many others, advanced the researchers' understanding of photosynthesis. Light did not have to shine on the plant while these chemical reactions took place. During the CO2 starved exposure to light, the algae had stored the light energy and then used that energy to construct. Light did not have to, yeah, so it's D, right? Because this is very clearly the conclusion that you can draw, that it did not have to, light did not have to shine on the plant while these chemical reactions were taking place because it was stored energy, right? And so they were able to conclude that light was not directly responsible. So it also transitions well with the next paragraph. Okay, let's grade this. So we have to start from 23rd. Yeah, I'll just open the answer key for writing. Yeah, I think I can do it like this. And keep this a little to the right. Yeah. Okay, C, D, B, C, D, C, D, B, C, D, A, D, B, A, B, B, A, D, B, A, B, B, okay. D, A, C, D, B, D, A, C, D, B, and C, D, A, A, D, D, C, D, A, A, D, D. Okay, so we got all correct. So that completes solutions for the writing section of this test. And with this, we have completed the solutions for writing in math. The reading solutions are still left, which I'll upload soon. So make sure you subscribe to the channel in order to receive notifications when those are uploaded. I'll see you in a new video soon. Take care. Bye-bye.